Alrighty, welcome back from spring break, everyone. And it is week 14, Learn Together. And I say that, and you're probably thinking, Rio, we're already back. Well, hopefully you know by now, I record the week 14 Learn Together a week before it's due. So this is actually my first recording from coming back from break. So that's why I say it. All right, so this week we finish our section where we're learning about advanced objects and functions, constructor functions. And really, you then learn about the class syntax. And again, I love this term, and I've heard it before called syntax sugar, because it's basically just what you've learned and what we did last week and the section that you did last week. So it's really taking that same concept, but putting it in a class syntax that's more like what you see in other languages. So, what I wanted to do, and I actually had a different plan for today. I was actually going to have you um, write some code based on what we did last week. But as I was doing my example, I actually realized that maybe a better way to do this, and this is why I say this, is to take my make should be say make my code, not take my code better. Make M-A-K make my code better. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So what I did, and I have an explanation at the end for like a little bit of a caveat or a little bit of a just a heads up about what we're doing here. Because think about it, right? In his example, he's using this hangman game. And the way he's instantiating his objects based on the constructor function and then ultimately the class is he's using the keyboard input. And it might have made you wonder why he wasn't actually getting input the way we've learned to get input, which is the most traditional way, which is to use a form or input fields, right? And the actual reason, so I guess I'm starting with the caveat, the actual reason is a little bit involved why he didn't, although I don't know his actual thinking. And I wanted you to know that this idea of using a class is typically something we see on a back end system, something that would be a database where when you're writing to databases, you use this idea of a class because it allows you to do more data related functions. And so the fact that he's introducing it here is a good introduction and you want to understand it. But the typical way you see this implemented is not on a front end system. And I think that's why Andrew came up with this hangman game just as a way to give you the idea, to give you the experience of having the user input instantiate the objects. Let me slow down for a minute because that is an important concept of, because we've been using objects from early on in this class, but this is a new way and a more advanced way to create instantiate, because that's another word we use for creating objects is instantiating objects. And it gives you this nice idea of the prototypal inheritance so that we can write methods across our objects that are instantiated. And now this week we can actually do subclassing and getters and setters. So what I decided to do is I decided to take the concept, the code, and that's actually what I will show you in a minute. So what I did is I took the code from last week, and I want you to actually take my code from this week. So I want you to take my code, and I'll give you the link. This is the output. We'll go over in a minute. And I want you to make mine better. And what I mean by that is I'm actually doing what I said we typically don't, which is instantiating using classes in the front end from the user inputs to create these objects. And I had a pretty good discussion last night with a professional developer about, how realistic is this? And he's like, well, and that's where him and I had a conversation about really where is this concept used? Because I don't see it used on the front end a lot as far as examples on the web. And that's when he helped clarify what I'd already felt was true, which is that you see this more on the back end. But I thought, why couldn't we give you the experience of doing it on the front end? Because you have all that you need, right? I mean, think about it, right? So here's the order, and I ended up changing the order class. So that's one thing, is we're putting just the class in a file by itself. So I want you to set it up the same way. And the way I had done it is I also had the line items as a separate class. That's how I ended up doing mine. I know you all approached it a little differently. I think I've seen two of you do it, and you had your own approach to doing it. My requirements was that you can have orders and multiple varying line items. So, but this week, right? So anyway, just to continue that concept, right? So this is my modified code. So this is my class. That's the constructor. So again, it feels very much like what we did before. Now I have a display, which this is a method that just displays on the page, and then I have display total. So in my code, I ended up running display total, and then I chained it. I invoked the display total, passing in an array of line items or one line item. I could do it either way. And then once that came back, I displayed it I called the display to actually place it on the page. And you can still do that, and you will see that in my week 14. But what I did is I also created a subclass. And again, learning about that this week, you can see that I added mobile order, because I thought about the idea of, right, what if your order was mobile? Then you would need, in this case, a bare minimum piece you would need would be a location. Because imagine customer places an order and the company has multiple locations they can pick it up at. So that would be the idea, right? And then show order location. But it's only when, and then the idea of understanding how to instantiate, how to implement a subclass. And I've shown it in my code over here, so we'll go over that in a minute. So the first thing is to understand my code, right? And to do that, you need to have gone through, of course, this section. And so this will give you another experience of deepening your knowledge about that. So here's what I did, is I created a form that gathers the information so that you can instantiate the objects for, in this case, an order. Okay. And what I want you to do, I'll show you in a second how it works. But I want you to make this better, because as I was doing it, because my first thought was I was going to have you all do this on your own. But then I thought, no, I want you to see my example, but I want you to know my example needs some work, and I want you to work on it. Make sense? So here's the idea. And by the way, the one thing you need to do is implement some better validation, as we all agreed to here. Because at bare minimum, what I've done is I've created a form, and in that form, I've made the fields required. But as we said, that's the bare minimum you need to do. You really need to write client-side validation for this, and we saw a great example. Follow that style that we saw on Web Dev Simplified. But in this case, if I give a customer name, and again, I've simplified this a little bit to not require so many inputs. And I'll show you the way I actually grab the values, because as of course you've seen, you can actually do document query selector by ID to grab them, but I ended up just grabbing them off the form. But again, I want you to make this better. I want you to think about different ways to do this, because there are some issues in the way I've given you this starting code. But in this case, without even filling out this, right, if I hit submit, then I have one line item. Okay, item order, $3 for a smoothie, right? Ordered one, right? And then here's that total, right? So here's that method, the display. And again, I'll show you, but I talked about how I called getting the line item and then passed that into the display on the page. So let's say I wanted to, check this out. Let's say I wanted both, right? Now, how would I do that? So I'll show you in the code how I did that. And there's definitely better ways to do it, but I was kind of like, I just wanted to give you the experience of how would you get, because in this case you have two line items. Again, that's my other class, right? So that outputted fine. And it did output, even though, right, it's calling that event listener. I only have one event listener. I definitely think you could do more than one to make this better. So, but here's the final situation. So you can make this better for sure. And now let's say I do this. Let's say I have, just to show you, right? Let's say I'm doing both. And then I want mobile order. Now I actually could make this, and I thought about this, is making this more dynamic, that only if they do mobile order, then you can dynamically put this in here. Because the thing is, and the way this I have it, is if they click this, I don't make this absolutely required, and you need to do that, right? So let's say I said Clovis DMB, whatever, just making up something. But the way my code works right now is when you hit submit, right, it gives you the, oh, by the way, it's not picking up. Oh, I see it's not picking up sandwich. I need to figure that out. So that's another thing you can figure out. Customer order, mobile order is 7. And look, now that we've done this, you can see that I put in order will be picked up in Clovis. So each of these is a new substantiated object. The other thing we could be doing is actually populating an order total, but at this point, I think you get the idea. So let me show you the code that does this. As I showed you before, here's the code, and you again take this code and create your week 14. But here is what I did just to create this functionality, and this is the part I want you to work on to make better, because this is not finished by any means. This is just a start, and there's definitely, again, the process of iteration. You write something, you realize it could be written better. First thing I wanted to do was just get something done. So on my app.js, that on my index, and you'll see this, is I brought in the script, the order, and then I brought in the app because the app needs the order. So in terms of sequencing, and then I did a query get element by the form. And the reason I did that is so I could just pull out, because this creates an array of all the elements. But again, I want you to think about how to make this better. Then I put an event listener on submit, right? And then here what I did is I got the customer name by just indicating the array on the target. Because again, if you output, and I recommend you do this, look at what's in this form. You can see that it is just it's array of all the elements on the form. Again, you can change the way you do this. And then I set up the order. I set up the item 1. And again, this is like the smoothie order. This is the cost. Now the cost in this case, what I did, and you could do this differently for sure. But what I did is let me show you this, is I set it up so that I used a radio button, and I put a value, and the value indicated the cost. But think about different ways you could do this, right? Because that's what I want you to do. I grabbed, and the quantity in this case I just put as 1. One of the upgrades you could definitely do is actually allow the user to input different quantities if you wanted. And then I created that line item by calling, so I've called new on order and I've called new on line item. And so just to get my first rough version done, just to see it work, I decided to check to see if target 3 was checked. Now this is the idea that if I also check both the sandwich and the smoothie, because in that case I have to set up a second line item, right? And then I had to check to see if it was a mobile order. And then you can see what happened here is when I've done a mobile order, I then have to call the mobile order by substantiating it with this customer, but now I have to add the location. But remember, behind the scenes, what it's doing is calling order, or it's substantiating the order because it's a subclass, so you still need whatever you need for the order. And then I've displayed the line totals, and then I've displayed the total, and this is what I was talking about before, where I say display total, passing it in either a single line item or a multiple line item. And then what comes back, I then just display on the page, and then I added the mobile order. Else, I just set up the order. I just call the order that was done. Where's that at? Where's order 1 done? Up here, right? Up here. Okay. So I want you to think about what I've done here, because this is not, there's other ways to do this. And I want you to come up with those other ways to do this, right? Because this code is actually not correct. And by the way, I used a form.submit, right? So think about different ways. You could add different event listeners, right? Because the idea of this exercise is for you to gain a deeper knowledge about these classes and how to use them, how to implement them. Again, these are good things to know, because when you move forward with development, you learn how to do this from what's called a full stack implementation. But understand these basics now will help you when you get there. So this code isn't, and you already saw where I had an issue with the sandwich. So you have to fix that. And again, make this better, figure out a different way to do it. I haven't been specific. Let me come back to this before I let you go. I haven't been specific on what I want you to change, but I want you to make this work. Okay. And again, I think this starting code should give you a way of thinking about it. I was actually just ready to rewrite it when I thought, I think I'm going to do this versus having you create this idea, because it's hard to understand what and how we're doing it now, based on the fact that we're implementing the front end to grab the inputs to instantiate the class. And again, this is why I think he used the keyboard input, Andrew did, just to play the game, because it was just like he didn't have to deal with all this. But I think dealing with this, I hope, you tell me if this is true, helps you deepen your knowledge here. And this also makes me really, and this is what I will end with today, this really makes me think about how I'm going to have you do your dev 2. And what I may end up doing, you'll hear me talk about this, because now that I've thought about this and I've actually had a discussion with somebody that does professional development, is I think I actually end up doing what's called an interview for the code review, where I ask you questions to make sure you understand these 2 sections. Because these last 2 sections, where first you're learning about classes, the concept of this class, and then of course the all important, the last section that we will start next week, which is asynchronous JavaScript, is, I think, one of those, if you understand it, when you get into more advanced programming classes, it will benefit you to have a strong understanding and then be able to take that into your more advanced programming classes. But I'm still thinking about that. But this gave me a better appreciation of that. So there you go. I'm trying to come up with new things every week as I look at what we're covering and try to think about how I can give you experiences to deepen your knowledge about that. And that's what I have for week 14. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you soon.